Hey guys, welcome to my weather lesson for today. I'm meteorologist Alexandra Cranford, and we've been doing these weather lessons since last week for all the students who are stuck at home and adults as well who might want a little something fun to do with your time at home. Thank you for joining me. We're doing our weather lesson live today, and we're doing a little bit of an experiment. So if you can get some ingredients together, that would be great. I know I didn't warn you guys ahead of time, so you may have to get these together and do your experiment from home a little bit later. But what we will need today, we're talking about thunderstorms and how the currents work in a thunderstorm, both updrafts and downdrafts. So again, if you're joining us, and I'm seeing people join in, thanks for joining us. And always, as always, let me know where you're watching from, because I do like to see that and see where you guys are watching from. So this is what we need today. And you may see I'm in a different location because we're going to do this little experiment. These are the three things that we will need. This is a classic meteorology weather science experiment. You may have seen it before, but I have actually never done this before. You will need one clear plastic container, pretty big. You will need some ice cubes that have blue food coloring in them. And you'll also need red food coloring. So just 1, 2, 3 things. Clear plastic container, some ice cubes that you've frozen with a few drops of blue food coloring in each, and then a little bit of red food coloring as well. Wow, seeing people from Lockport, from Chicago, from New Orleans, from Laplace. Thanks for joining me, guys. We're gonna have a little bit of fun today with our experiment. So just to give you a look at what these kind of look like, of course, here's my clear plastic container. Maybe not the best in the world, but this is what I have. And I filled it about 2/3 of the way full with some warm water. Not super hot, just some warm water. And here's my little clear plastic container. The other thing we needed was ice cubes that have been frozen with blue food coloring. So mine are a weird shape because I actually don't have ice cube trays because I don't eat ice a lot. But I did freeze these in a cup, so even if you don't have ice trays, you could just freeze them in a cup, put a couple of drops of blue food coloring, and that's what you need there. And then we also just need a little bit of red food coloring. And I think in my case it's actually hot pink because I had to get the, have you guys seen the neon food coloring little vials? That's the only kind they had, so that's what I had to go with. We are going to combine all of these things, as you may imagine, in a weather experiment where we see what happens with both warm and cold air in a thunderstorm, or even just in the atmosphere. So I'll tell you a little bit about it, then we'll do the experiment, and then we'll talk a little bit about what happens, and then we will also talk about the different stages of thunderstorms today. So again, here we go. What we're going to see first is that this is, as you can imagine, kind of representing the Earth's atmosphere, and especially warm, moist air in the atmosphere. What the cold blue ice particles, or in this case ice kind of circles, ice cubes, are going to represent is cold air moving in. And then when we put the dye, a couple of drops of red or hot pink dye into the warm water, that will kind of show you what's going to happen with the warm air. So we are going to do it. Are you ready? Cold air, atmosphere with warm air, and we're going to see what happens. Now I'm going to do it here, and I will try to hold it up and show you guys. Eventually, as you know, red and blue are going to combine and it's going to turn purple, so that will happen. But I gotta say, this is a really cool experiment to do at home if you do have a few minutes, and maybe you could watch this video a little later just to kind of remind yourself what to do, because it's really nice to see in person. You can see the little swirls and the what we would call convection, the transfer of these different temperature water areas. You can see that a lot better at home. So this would be really cool and pretty easy, as you can see, to kind of get the stuff together and do on your own. So I'll show you it here, but remember, it always looks better at home. So here we go. We're gonna put in our ice cubes. The blue ice cubes in the warm water. And now in another part, you kind of try to keep those on one side. You can add the red food coloring, just a couple of drops, and just kind of see what happens. What you will see, if I can hold it up here, I don't know if this is going to work, if you can see it clearly or not, But you can see that the red is going to go, do you see what's happening? It's kind of swirling here. And we're seeing the cold, even though it's floating on the top, the blue is showing up farther down while the red kind of goes to the top. So again, this is something to see as you can, view it right here. But again, if you do this at home, it's a lot cooler to watch, and you can kind of see the mixing and the swirling, and it looks really cool. So again, it's all kind of turning purple at this point, but it's a cool experiment to see when you do see what settles to the bottom and what goes to the top. So what this represents, of course, is the cold and warm air that happens in the atmosphere. And what we see a lot of times with either cold fronts or on really hot days when we have thunderstorms developing is warm air rising. And so that's a major mechanism that we have with thunderstorms. So with cold fronts, for example, this one we had our cold air moving in. You would have the warm air kind of being driven up and the colder, denser air moving in and staying closer to the surface. So that kind of forces this rising motion in the atmosphere. And as we talked about last week with our clouds Facebook Live weather lesson, when you have moisture moving upward in the atmosphere, eventually it reaches a point where it has to condense and it forms clouds, which is why we see the clouds farther up in the atmosphere. We also see, this is kind of a cool experiment, not only just to see the general motion there, but also to see updrafts and downdrafts. So in a thunderstorm, especially in South Louisiana, we can get really big, kind of crazy thunderstorms sometimes, and there are things going on within the storm, both very strong updrafts with the rising air and downdrafts. And in some cases, we can even see that in the form of, for example, strong wind gusts, which would be with the downward motion. We can also see that with hail. Kind of weird when we get a thunderstorm in Louisiana where it's a hot, super hot, sweaty day, and then we get little frozen particles on the ground from certain thunderstorms because the ice crystals have been gone way up high where it's cold in the atmosphere and then come back down to where it's super hot at the surface. So we have talked a little bit about cold fronts coming in with the colder, denser air driving under the rising, warmer air. We've talked about updrafts and downdrafts. And now what we're going to get into briefly is the stages or life cycles of a thunderstorm. So especially for all the students out there, this is just something useful to know. And we in South Louisiana, I'm sure at this point in our lives, have seen many, many thunderstorms forming up and then eventually dissipating. And so this is just a quick look at those stages of the different thunderstorm development. So thunderstorm life cycle, number one, the first stage is the towering cumulus stage. We talked about cumulus clouds in my last weather lesson last week, and that's when we have these clouds billowing up with that rising motion of rising moist air. So in this first stage of a thunderstorm development, you would have clouds reaching up to maybe 20,000 feet or so in height. The second stage, notice that the first stage, by the way, is mostly upward motion. The next one you can see is mature cumulus stage. This is the main one that we think of when we think of thunderstorms. This would be where we have lightning sometimes forming, we have heavy rain. This would also be where sometimes we get severe weather in this middle stage with possibly large hail. Sometimes tornadoes would form at the end of this stage, and also heavy rain. All of these things would be happening during that middle stage, the mature stage, mature cumulus stage for a thunderstorm. And notice while the beginning is dominated by upward motion, in the middle you have both upward and downward motion happening within a thunderstorm. And then the third stage is what we call the dissipating stage. And by the way, in that second phase, the mature cumulus stage, cloud tops all clouds at that point. And then the dissipating stage, of course, would be when it is starting to finish up. So this would be when the downdraft cuts off the updraft. So in this last stage, it's really dominated by downward motion because the updraft, that influx of the warm, moist air that's kind of fueling the storm, gets cut off by the downdraft. The downdraft just kind of shuts it off, and that's what a lot of times triggers the end of a thunderstorm. So in that last stage, the dissipating stage, that's where we start to see just kind of lighter rain. We start to see the cloud falling apart a little bit if you're just kind of casually watching from somewhere else. And that would be where, again, the light showers can continue, but it will probably be wrapping up pretty soon as far as the thunderstorms go. So, by the way, when we talk about this for South Louisiana, we often, of course, see these thunderstorms forming when there's just so much heat and humidity and moisture in the summertime to fuel this upward motion of storms. And we also get it in the winter, and actually haven't had this set up for a while now, but we get it along cold fronts that are coming in, often from the west and northwest. And so if you've seen us on WWL tracking our cold front line, sometimes we'll call it a more specific term, a squall line, which can develop sometimes. Next time you see that, it might be kind of interesting to kind of visualize that that is the colder, dense air coming in, driving in along the surface and forming up these storms as it moves in, forming that upward motion in the atmosphere along the front where the denser, colder air is moving in and it's being unstable. We're seeing the warmer air rising up like that. So thank you guys for joining me today. We did our little experiment, and what do we have here? Kind of a weird dark purple kind of color here. If you do this experiment, you will see the same thing. But I showed you the ingredients that you needed. If you're just joining us, by the way, I'll just pop those up really quick. Once again, you just need the clear plastic container, ice cubes with blue food coloring, and then some red food coloring too, to kind of recreate what's happening in the atmosphere with warm air and with cold air. So we did our little experiment. We talked about the stages of thunderstorms, and I think tomorrow, well, we are doing another weather lesson tomorrow, so I hope you can join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. on WWL's Facebook Live again. But tomorrow, I think we're going to talk about ingredients of thunderstorms, what you need for thunderstorms to form. And as you may know, I love to bake. So when I decided, we should talk about thunderstorm ingredients, and then I thought, oh, and I also like to bake, you can imagine what we might be doing in tomorrow's weather lesson, which I hope you can join me for. So that will be a little something that we kind of finish up the week with, I think this week, which will happen tomorrow. So again, I'm coming to you from the end, almost the end of my self-quarantine. I was traveling and then came back last weekend and have been having to bring you these lessons from home, but it's been so much fun to see where you guys are joining from, to see your comments, and please join me again tomorrow for another weather lesson. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your, Wednesday? Hard to keep track of days these days. But anyway, I hope you have a good rest of your Wednesday. Stay safe, stay healthy, guys, and I will see you tomorrow, Thursday, at 1 p.m. on WWL's Facebook Live. Take care.